Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. One common refrain in the mainstream media's lopsided coverage of the Republican presidential primary season has been, when will Ron Paul win a state? When he wins a state, we'll start taking him seriously. There was a time when Ron Paul actually got the majority of votes in the Virgin Islands primary, but then Mitt Romney received the majority of delegates. And I say, fine, we'll give that one to Mitt Romney if the mainstream media agree to give Ron Paul Minnesota, Colorado, and most likely Iowa. Because what happened in Minnesota at the district conventions was that 20 out of the 24 delegates are Ron Paul supporters. In Colorado, a majority of the delegates were captured by a unified Paul-Santorum slate, where the Paul supporters and the Santorum supporters got together and decided to outnumber the Romney supporters by pooling their votes for the same delegates. Well, now that Rick Santorum is out of the race, that unity slate is most likely going to support Ron Paul. And in Iowa, of course, despite lengthy refusals by the mainstream media to admit this, the Iowa Republican Party has been taken over by Ron Paul supporters. It started with the election of A.J. Spiker as the new chairman of the Iowa Republican Party. Mr. Spiker is a Ron Paul supporter. And now numerous other positions have also gone to Ron Paul supporters. There's an excellent article on this development by Doug Weed, who is Ron Paul's campaign strategist. I will provide a link. There's also, interestingly enough, a very fair report on this matter by Rachel Maddow, who points out correctly that the narrative of Mitt Romney sailing to receive the Republican nomination is far from the truth. In reality, there is much more of a contest for this nomination than the mainstream media would like to admit. And since the Iowa Republican Party chairman is going to be one of the Iowa delegates to the National Convention, there's one, and there are sure to be others. But what is happening is Associated Press, the New York Times, and other similar biased mainstream media outlets are only predicting one delegate for Iowa. So it's the barest minimum they could get away with predicting without it being an outright lie. At this point, they could claim, well, this is just an estimate. Nobody knows until the final determinations have been made at the Iowa state conventions. But look, the probability is that if the Iowa GOP is now largely in the hands of Ron Paul supporters, if a lot of the delegates from the lower levels of the Iowa caucuses are Ron Paul supporters, who do you think is going to be nominated to go on to the National Convention? I don't even think I need to articulate that. And of course, other caucus states are moving along with higher levels of their caucuses and conventions, including my own state of Nevada, where, incidentally, my wife and I are going to be delegates to the state Republican convention on May 4th and 5th. And we are aware of many other Ron Paul supporters who have been elected as delegates as well. In Nevada, the situation is a little different because on the first round of voting at the National Convention, the delegates are bound to vote proportionally with respect to the results of the preference poll. So the percentage of delegates that will go to Mitt Romney will correspond with the percentage of votes that Mitt Romney received during the preference poll on February 4th. That being said, that only applies for the first round. So if Ron Paul supporters get most of those delegate slots, sure, some of them will be obligated to vote for Mitt Romney on the first round. But if Mitt Romney doesn't win straight away on the second round, those same delegates could turn around and vote for anyone they choose. And this is really the hoped-for outcome. Mitt Romney is most likely going to have a plurality of delegates. I don't think he's going to hit a majority of delegates until the day of the convention, unless the field changes dramatically. Santorum's exit from the race has not changed it considerably, because Santorum has not endorsed Romney, and he has deliberately emphasized again and again that he is not going to endorse anyone at this time. Now, that may change. I hope it doesn't change. I hope that Newt Gingrich stays in the race, as much as I find him to be a supremely unappealing individual. I think it is good to have another contender in there to, again, split the delegates. Hopefully some of Paul's delegation will grow. Some of Santorum's delegates could switch over to Paul. And if Gingrich does drop out, hopefully some of Gingrich's delegates will switch over to Paul as well. But really, having Gingrich in there, I think, is better, because that way there could be a three-way split with no candidate getting a numerical majority of the delegates in the first round. So this is far from over. Considering that the largest primaries have yet to happen, Texas is a great example. That is Representative Paul's home state, where he is certain to have a great deal of support. California is another state that is going to allocate a very large number of delegates. In California, Dr. Paul has had an outpouring of support. He has had thousands of people attend his rallies. And that is despite the fact that those rallies have received pretty much zero mainstream media coverage. People still come out in massive, massive crowds, because this election is no longer in the hands of the mainstream media. They do not get to dictate the narrative, even if they refuse to report on the facts or if they cherry-pick the facts. The narrative will be determined by the decisions of the American people. And that's not to say it will turn out a certain way. The American people could vote wisely or they could vote foolishly. But they have their own wills. And I think the mainstream media need to respect that. They need to be objective. They need to report on even the facts that are not pleasant to their parent companies, who are heavy contributors to establishment candidates like Mitt Romney. And furthermore, I think the people need to realize that there's a lot more to this race than most of the talking heads will tell you. Why is it, you should ask, that Ron Paul is capturing all of these delegate slots? Why is it that in certain states, the composition of the Republican Party itself is changing because of Dr. Paul's influence? And I think if you ask those questions, the answers you will arrive at are very interesting. And what they have to do with is the fact that there's a growing recognition that this country is heading in a terrible direction. When the Supreme Court rules that anybody suspected, not proved to be guilty of any offense, no matter how minor, even if it's a procedural error, when the Supreme Court rules that that person can be taken to a jail and strip searched as a matter of routine procedure, even if no probable cause exists that that person is trying to smuggle contraband into a jail, we clearly have a problem. When time and again bills are introduced in the US Congress that are attempting to censor free speech on the internet, deter independent creators from putting their work out there under the guise of copyright protection or intellectual property protection, or institute a blanket surveillance of all Americans and their telephone conversations, their email communications under the guise of cybersecurity, we have a problem. When going to the airport carries a likelihood that you will be groped or virtually strip searched, we have a problem. When our nation is drowning in debt because of wasteful costly wars that the people of occupied countries don't want us to fight, while American forces, intentionally or not, kill the civilians of those countries, we have a problem. And Dr. Paul recognizes that we have a problem. And this recognition, I hope, will reach a critical mass. Hopefully this election season, but if not, the momentum will continue. It's not over yet. Thank you very much, and may we have more victories like this in the future.